no time where we should be more actively engaged in what we are receiving than when we receive the body of Christ. So the proper understanding of this active participation should be this idea of active receptivity. The Council Fathers were right. This is the aim to be considered before all else. This must have an impact on the choice of music, placement of choir in the church, how the readings are done, the use of vestments, organization of the sanctuary. Every aspect of the liturgy is touched on by this understanding of how God is operating in us and how He's calling us to respond to Him in the liturgy. So that is trying to come to a better understanding of what the Council really called for, really intended when it put forth this idea of full conscious and active participation, and put it forth as the aim to be sought before all else, the reform of the liturgy. Going on then to another important regulation. The Constitution, Sacrosanctum Concilium, states very clearly that the regulation of the sacred liturgy depends solely on the authority of the Church, that is, on the Apostolic See, and, as laws may determine, on the bishop. It says, quote, "Therefore, no person, not even a priest, may add, remove, or change anything in the liturgy on his own authority." The Council Fathers could not be more clear about this. And Pope Benedict has said very frankly that in the past decades there have been abuses in the Church regarding the sacred liturgy, because there have been people, priests and other people, who, taking this, assuming this authority on their own, have added, have changed, have removed things from the sacred liturgy. But it's clear that this is not in any way something the Council Fathers wanted, envisioned, or thought that was possible. So, we live in a church that is full of the grace of God and full of sinful people. So we can't be too surprised that abuses have happened. It was certainly not the first time in the church. But it's good to recognize, particularly from our vantage point now, some 40 years after the Council, that some things were truly and sincerely wrong in how the Council was implemented by persons, individuals that brought about, that chose to do certain things. A last point then about this first chapter, and I won't talk about all the other chapters this long. The Council says that the use of the Latin language is to be preserved in the Latin rites. It says, since the use of the vernacular, whether in the Mass, the administration of the sacraments, or in other parts of the liturgy may frequently be of great advantage to the people, a wider use may be made of it, especially in the readings, directives, and in some prayers and chants. So, the Council clearly says that use can be made of the vernacular, but nowhere does it say in this Constitution that the liturgy should be done completely in the vernacular. We'll come to another point where it talks about certain things that should be preserved in Latin. It says the Latin language is to be preserved. The vernacular can be used, particularly for the readings of the sacred scripture, so that they can be understood, and in some prayers. But Latin is the language of the liturgy in the Latin Church, to which we belong. So that's chapter 1 on the theology of the liturgy. Chapter 2 is called the most sacred mystery of the Eucharist, and just 2 points here. The Church earnestly desires that Christ's faithful, when present at the celebration of the Eucharist, should not be there as strangers or silent spectators. On the contrary, through a good understanding of the rites and prayers, they should take part in the sacred action, conscious of what they are doing with devotion and full collaboration. So again, the theme of full conscious and active participation. But interestingly, in the next sentence, the council elaborates on this participation. It says, the faithful should give thanks to God, offering the immaculate victim, not only through the hands of the priest, but also together with him, they should learn to offer themselves. So the council clearly puts this forth as the ideal of our participation in the sacred liturgy, learning to offer ourselves with the victim who is being offered and in the hands of the priest. And then another point, building on what we just talked about, a suitable place may be allotted to the vernacular language in masses which are celebrated with the people, especially in the readings and prayers of the faithful, and also, as local conditions warrant, in those parts which pertain to the people. Nevertheless, care must be taken to ensure that the faithful may also be able to say or sing together in Latin those parts of the ordinary of the Mass which pertain to them. What are those parts? Principally, they are the Kyrie, which is actually not in Latin, but the one part of the liturgy that is the retained Greek. The Kyrie, the Gloria, the Credo, the Creed, the Sanctus, which is the Holy Holy, the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, the Pater Noster, our Father. These parts that we now normally say or sing together, the council says care must be taken to ensure that the faithful are able to say or sing these together in Latin. And to this extent, about 10 years after this document was released, the Sacred Congregation for the Liturgy at the Vatican released a booklet called Jubilate Deo. And the Holy Father, Pope Paul VI, mandated that this booklet be sent to every bishop in the world. And it contained a repertoire of about 20 simple pieces of Gregorian chants in Latin. And the Holy Father clearly said that bishops are to see that all of their faithful can learn to sing these chants so that we have a universal repertoire of music that we can sing when we come together to celebrate the liturgy. Sadly, this, I don't know where this document ended up in most dioceses, but it often did not get implemented. Now, you can still get it. It's still available. But, yes?
You know, it's really interesting you mentioned that we have often attended Mass at St. Joe, which has a very large Hispanic contingent as well as the traditional Kentucky contingent. In fact, my son canted Spanish, and it was almost impossible to actually have a full parish liturgy. And I remember saying to my wife, you know, they ought to have a lot more of the Latin. At least everyone would be in the same boat instead of their language and our language.
That's right. It is meant to be the universal language of the Church, so that we can celebrate together as one body, even if some parts of the Mass might be celebrated in different vernacular languages. If you watch, maybe on EWTN, any of the papal liturgies, Christmas, Easter, there will be readings and prayers for the faithful in many different languages, particularly the prayers for the faithful, many different languages. But oftentimes, these ordinary parts of the Mass will be sung in Latin, so that all people can join together in one voice and worship God. There's nothing wrong with having a reading done in a language you might not understand. You can follow along, you can read it later on your own. But there are these very important parts of the Mass, the ordinary of the Mass, it's called, that we should be able to enter into with one voice. And so it makes complete sense to have this universal language. And the Council, just so it's clear, clearly asks for this. Great care should be taken to ensure it. All right, moving on then. Chapter 3 is about the other sacraments and sacramentals. Just one point. There are many points in all of these chapters, but we can only look at a few highlights. One point that you're probably familiar with, the Second Vatican Council restored the rite of Christian initiation of adults, which is what we call it now, a catechumenate for adults.